So raising children, Chapter 9, is probably one of the most difficult jobs that you'll ever do in your life. And so we'll talk about that and talk about some of the things that go into this. Of course, parenting is not the same everywhere. Child allowance or family allowance is a cash benefit that is paid to some families by the government to offset the cost of raising children. Children are very expensive to raise. The latest estimate is about $233,000 throughout a child's lifetime. That is till they're 18. And of course, the primary job in raising children is socializing them, which is a lifelong process. Parents help instill the cultural values and skills needed to function in society. And there are some theoretical approaches to doing this. Of course, the most the earliest one was Sigmund Freud, which is probably the least useful for any of us. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about him. But it includes the learning how to integrate the id, which is the biological component of a human being, the superego, which is the conscience that we develop, and then of course the id, which is kind of the balance point of both of those, based on the demands of society or reality. Piaget probably had even less to say. He primarily focused on cognitive development, but suffice it to say that his stage of sensory motor, operational, concrete operations, and formal operations really give children and teenagers basically some limitations on what they can do and what they can't do. So in that context, it's important. You wouldn't expect the same things out of a 14-year-old as you would out of a 4-year-old. But sociologists had more to say, and probably more relevant information to say. And they included Charles Horton Cooley and George Herbert Mead, who really worked on the development of the social self. Cooley called it the looking glass self, and of course we know that a looking glass is a mirror. We respond or we develop a sense of ourselves through how others perceive us, and we respond to those perceptions that other people feed back to us. Mead, on the other hand, focused more on the process of role taking, and he primarily looked at this through children's play. There were other psychologists, notably Alfred Bandura, who said that humans learn to socialize through watching and modeling other people's behavior. So who are those people that teach our children? Well, we call them agents of socialization. And they include parents, schools, siblings, and society in general. Each social class socializes their children differently. For most middle and upper class families, for example, you'll notice that the number of computers varies. It's hard to imagine life nowadays without a computer, but as you look at the age groups, older people have far less than younger people do. And even at that, computers are helping to socialize our kids. It even varies with ethnic group and racial groups, and of course varies with how much education a person has. Different racial groups or ethnic groups socialize differently. Imagine black, white, and Hispanic families talking to their children about things like prejudice and discrimination, or how to cope with those things. So imagine if you're in one racial group versus another, the messages and ideas behind what things are like racial profiling or even white privilege are, how they're socialized into your life. And even gender is socialized very early in life. Imagine if you know the sex of a child, your paint choices or gift choices for that child. Parenting is then the lifelong task of raising children. And Boomerang, back in the 1960s, came up with a typology that included 3 and possibly a 4th parenting style. Authoritative parents are parents that are demanding but maintain high levels of control over the child, but are warm and receptive. Permissive parents place few controls and demands on the child, and essentially they raise socially irresponsible children. And then authoritarian parents is a parenting style that is strict and punitive with not much warmth. Imagine if you have your own children, how you parent, and if you don't, what type of parents style did your parents have? And were they the same or were they different? Mothering, of course, is both an identity and an activity. So, and sometimes those can cause role conflicts. Do parents, both the mother and the father in a traditional family, do they have the same responsibilities for raising children at home? As you'll notice from the graph that more women feel not well rested as opposed to men, regardless of how many children you have. Fathering, too, is both an identity and an activity. Father's time over the years has grown significantly from the 1960s to 2011, whereas mother's time, while it's grown, has been high across the years. This chart looks at the time with children. Is it too much or too little? Mothers, almost 3 to 1, say that they spend too much time with their children, but the percentages seem to be leveling out. The other dynamic is not only do parents affect their children, but children affect their parents. Parenting experience is shaped by a child's temperament. Imagine a temperamental child versus an even-tempered child. By their cognitive abilities, whether raising a child who's very smart or one who's not, or a special needs child. The health and well-being of a child, if you have a sickly child versus a healthy child. Even the sex of the child can influence parents' ability to parent that. Parenting also is and affects family context. Parenting teenagers is far different than parenting toddlers. Parenting by yourself versus parenting with a partner. And even parenting in same-sex families. Or something that I might be able to relate to is grandparents raising grandchildren. No grandparent wants to raise their grandchildren all the time, although they do like being around their grandkids. Family households with children under 18, comparing 1950 and 2012. You can see that over the years that married couples are more likely to have kids under 18. And it's changed, and you can see the differences between mother only, father only, and no parent households. This reflects the percent of children living with single parents by race and ethnicity. You can see that African Americans have the highest single parent families as opposed to Asians, which is 17%. The demographics and hardship of children living with grandparents. The percentage is lower with higher elevations in age.